didn't leave because of the storm. I left because he looked at me like I wasn't there. The words we screamed at each other still echoed in my throat, raw and pointless. He'd said something sharp. I'd said something worse. I can't even remember now what started it, just the weight of years. The silence that thickened like mold in the corners of our marriage. I grabbed my coat, slammed the door, told myself I didn't care if he came after me. But when I sat behind the wheel and the porch light stayed off, something cracked. The snow came down in sheets, wipers barely keeping up. My hands clenched the steering wheel, driving nowhere. I just wanted distance from him, from myself. After an hour, I pulled into the only open gas station I could find, just a flickering sign off a forgotten road in Vermont. Fluorescent light buzzing. One car parked out front, half covered in white. Mine. Inside, it was warmer, but not by much. The place smelled like burnt coffee and old rubber. Behind the counter was a young man. Name tag said Liam. He didn't look up, just kept scrolling on his phone, face half lit by the screen. I could have been a ghost. I wandered the aisles, picked up a bag of chips I didn't want, a bottle of root beer. My hands needed something to hold then. The door opened, and the cold rushed in like a slap, so sharp it made me shiver. A second man stepped in, younger. Snow clung to his jacket as he shook it off. His eyes met mine direct, steady, like he knew I'd be here, like the storm had brought me for him. I looked away, but I could feel him still watching. He didn't speak, just stood there, letting the door close behind him. Then the lights went out. A buzzing stopped mid-sentence. Darkness fell, soft and sudden. Only the snow outside remained white and pulsing through the windows, casting shadows like fingers across the linoleum. Liam. I called, no answer. The boy was gone. I was alone, or not alone. I could feel the other man's presence, not threatening, not safe, just electric. The silence stretched. My breath felt loud. I stood still, gripping the counter like a lifeline. My wedding ring cold against my skin. Somewhere out there, Richard was still at home, still angry, still pretending not to care. And here I was lost, adrift, with a man who hadn't said a single word but had already shaken something loose inside me. I'd never believed in omens, but maybe fate doesn't need your belief. Maybe it only needs a crack in the wall and a storm strong enough to blow the door wide open. I didn't leave because of the storm. I left because he didn't look at me when I said goodbye. Because even in that final moment, his silence was louder than any scream I could manage. You never listen, not really. It's like talking to a wall. My voice had cracked, sharp with exhaustion more than anger. I threw my coat at him, more gesture than threat, and it landed across his lap. Ignored, Richard just sat there, thumbing the remote, eyes fixed on the flickering television. No reaction, not even a blink. Just that same wall of indifference. I grabbed my keys, my purse, slammed the door so hard it rattled the window panes. And still, he didn't follow. I told myself I didn't care, that I just needed to breathe, needed air that didn't smell like resentment and old furniture. But as I backed out of the driveway, headlights slicing through the snow, I watched the house in the rearview mirror. The porch stayed dark, no outline in the doorway, no apology, no concern, nothing. So I drove, no plan, no direction, just the road, covered in a thickening blanket of white. The heater struggled, my hands stiffened on the wheel. I didn't realize how cold I was until my fingers started to ache. But I couldn't stop, couldn't turn around, not yet. I passed shuttered diners, empty streets, fields swallowed by snow. The radio fizzled between static and half songs. Every sign blurred, every turn felt the same. Eventually, I saw a glow in the distance, a single blinking light. A gas station. One of those ancient ones that feel like they've been forgotten by the rest of the world. I pulled in, tires crunching over frost and gravel parked beneath the flickering canopy. The snow came down harder now, fat flakes clinging to the windshield, to the roof, to everything. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, breathing into the silence. My breath fogged the window in soft, rhythmic pulses. I didn't move until the car began to feel like a coffin. Inside, the station was dim, lit by a few buzzing fluorescents. The hum felt oddly intimate. The heat barely worked. My boots squeaked against the linoleum floor. There was only one person behind the counter. A boy, maybe 20, pale skin, dark hair, nose buried in his phone. His name tag said Liam. He didn't look up, didn't say anything. I wandered between aisles, not really looking for anything. Grabbed a soda, some pretzels, something to justify being here. Everything felt heavy, my coat, my chest, even the quiet. I thought about Richard, about how long it had been since he'd touched me just to be close, not out of routine, not because it was expected, but because he wanted to. I swallowed hard, blinking back something that felt dangerously close to grief. That's when the door opened. Cold slapped across the back of my neck, and I turned instinctively. The man who stepped in looked like he'd walked out of the storm on purpose, like the storm had shaped him, spit him out, then closed behind him. He shook the snow from his jacket, glancing around the room. Then he saw me, and he didn't look away. His eyes were steady, the kind you can feel more than see. Dark, maybe brown or gray. It was hard to tell in the lighting. He looked young, mid-20s. But he had that stillness, like someone older, someone who didn't need to prove anything. I looked down, heart knocking against my ribs. Held the soda can a little too tight. He didn't say a word, didn't smile, just stood there watching. And then the lights went out, not a flicker, not a warning, just darkness. The hum of the fridge stopped. The ceiling went quiet. The only sound was the wind, howling through the thin walls, rattling the glass like fingers tapping from the outside. Liam, I called, my voice too loud in the dark. No answer. I turned. The boy behind the counter was gone. I was alone. No, not alone. I could still feel the man somewhere in the dark, not moving, just there. The air changed, thickened, like static before a storm breaks. My chest tightened. I gripped the edge of a nearby shelf. It felt oddly comforting, solid, real. The windows glowed faintly, backlit by snow. Pale light pooled on the floor in jagged patches. My shadow stretched long beside me, his stretched toward me. I didn't believe in omens, but something inside me whispered that this moment, this stillness, this stranger, wasn't just coincidence. It was invitation or warning, and I didn't know which. The darkness didn't last long. A soft click echoed from the back room, followed by the scrape of something being dragged. Seconds later, a warm glow flickered to life, a battery lantern, dusty and dull, casting just enough light to push back the shadows. Liam reappeared, muttering under his breath. He set the lantern on the counter and shook his head, as if the power outage was just one more inconvenience in a long line of small, tired disappointments. His eyes barely grazed me. "Generator's dead," he said. "Fix it from here." He went back to scrolling, the glow from his phone now competing with the lantern. It was as if none of this mattered to him, not the storm, not the dark, not the strangers stuck inside with him. I stayed near the shelves, hands still wrapped around the soda. My fingertips tingled, not from cold, but from something more subtle. A thrum beneath my skin, the aftershock of being seen, of being watched like that. And then he moved. The other man, the one who had walked in from the snow. He stepped fully into the light, brushing ice crystals from his jacket. His boots squeaked on the floor. I finally saw him clearly. Jeans, a wool-lined coat, nothing remarkable. But on him, it felt like armor. His presence filled the space, not with noise, but with gravity. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the room with a kind of calm detachment. Then they found me again. I froze, not out of fear, something else, like the moment when music swells in a film, and you realize the story has changed, that something, someone, is about to matter. "Long night," he said, his voice low, dusted with something soft. Like velvet over gravel, I nodded, unsure why my mouth had gone dry. "Bitter one too," I managed. My voice felt foreign in the quiet. He smiled, just the edge of one, enough to feel, not enough to trust. "Casey," he offered, "Evelyn." The names hung between us like threads, too fragile to grab, too real to ignore. We stood there, not moving closer, not stepping away. I could feel Liam behind the counter, still disengaged, tapping his screen like the world outside didn't exist. I turned back to Casey. There was something about him, something in the way he took up space, without demanding it. He made me aware of my posture, the way my hands held the bottle, the way my hair might look in this dull yellow light. He looked young, 22 maybe, but his eyes weren't. His eyes held stories he hadn't told yet. And I felt ridiculous for noticing that. "You're passing through?" I asked, needing to break the silence that was starting to wrap too tightly around us. "Trying to." My truck couldn't make it up the hill, slid halfway down. decided not to die in a ditch tonight. A pause. Smart, I said. His gaze lingered a beat longer than it should have. Or maybe I just wanted it to. Then Liam let out a loud sigh, dropping his phone on the counter. "This is so boring," he muttered, dragging out the words like a teenager stuck in church. I turned toward him. "Well, it's not like we can go anywhere." "Exactly," he said, sitting on the edge of the counter now, legs dangling. "So we either stare at each other until dawn or do something." Casey raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Liam shrugged, then grinned. "I don't know, game cards, or something old school like spin the bottle." I blinked. The air shifted. Liam laughed at my expression. "Kidding, kind of." Casey's lips curved upward. "Kinda sounds like you're not." Liam tossed a plastic bottle in the air, empty, label half peeled. It hit the counter with a dull thud. "I mean, think about it. It's stupid, but it's something." I should have laughed, should have rolled my eyes, walked back to the car. But I didn't. Instead, I watched the bottle. And for one heartbeat too long, I wondered what it would mean if it pointed to me, what I'd do, what I'd let happen, what I'd want. Liam looked at me. "Worry, no kissing. Just a dare." Casey stepped forward. The light from the lantern caught the edge of his jaw, his eyes steady. "What kind of dares?" Liam shrugged again, too casual. "I don't know. Do something weird, something unexpected. You land on someone. You challenge them." Casey looked at me. "You in?" The question was simple, but it didn't feel small. I hesitated, then nodded. "One round," I said. Casey lowered the bottle to the floor, sat cross-legged like a kid. Liam hopped down and joined him, laughing at something under his breath. I lowered myself slowly, my knees stiff from age and tension. The linoleum was cold beneath me. The lantern flickered above like a candle on the verge of dying. Casey gave the bottle a spin. It whirled in a tight circle, faster, slower, and stopped. The neck pointed straight at me. Liam let out a soft oof of amusement. Well, Casey just smiled. The air pulsed. Something unspoken pressed in. He looked at me with that quiet intensity, not flirtation, not challenge, something in between. "Evelyn," he said softly, "your dare." I waited. "Dance." A silence. I blinked. "Dance." No music, no rhythm, just move, just let go. The words hung there. Liam stared, half in shock. "Man, that's weird." But I didn't look at him. I looked at Casey, and in his eyes, there was no mockery, only invitation. Something inside me stirred, something old, something buried. I took a slow breath, felt the floor beneath my hands, the weight of the moment. And I said, "Okay." The floor was cold against my palms as I pushed myself up. The bottle still sat between us, tilted slightly, as if reluctant to point at anyone else. Casey didn't move, didn't smirk. He just sat there watching me, the way someone watches a flame quietly, with something like reverence. I stood, my legs trembled, just a little, not from fear, not from age, but from the awareness that this moment, however strange, mattered. There was no music, only the wind outside, wailing like a memory that couldn't find its way home. I closed my eyes. let the silence press in. And then I moved, slow at first, a sway like water testing its own edges. Like a curtain stirring in a still room, my arms rose, not in grace, but in release. My hips shifted, uncertain, until they weren't. Every motion unspooled something inside me, the knots of years, the cold of being unseen. I danced the weight off my chest. I danced the dust off the corners of who I'd been. I danced as if no one was watching, and then, because I knew they were, when I opened my eyes, both of them were staring. Liam's mouth was slightly open, a bag of chips forgotten in his lap. Casey just watched, his gaze steady. Grounding, I turned, letting my back face them. Let my arms stretch forward, slow and deliberate, then twisted again, stepping back into their view, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. There was nothing vulgar in it, nothing obscene. But there was truth, my body, though softer now, marked by time, remembered rhythm, remembered being wanted. I was never a dancer, but tonight, I didn't need choreography. I just needed release. My hands slid over my hips, my head tilted to the side, like listening to a song only I could hear. And in that moment, I was Evelyn Clark, 62, wife of a man who hadn't touched her in years. I was a woman fully, absolutely alive when I stopped. The air felt different, thicker, charged. I breathed out, slow and shaky. A soft laugh escaped my lips. "Well," I said, "that happened." Casey's voice came next, low, almost reverent. "That was something." Liam coughed into his fist, trying too late to hide his grin. "You've got moves," he said, his voice half in awe, half in disbelief. I smiled, but something inside me tightened, that familiar tug of guilt, the echo of Richard's voice, of the life I had left behind in a storm. Would he be angry if he knew, or worse, would he not care at all? I sat down again, heart still racing. The bottle sat quietly between us, like it knew everything had shifted. Casey reached for it, he spun. This time, the bottle's path was smoother, more confident. It spun wide, the plastic base skipping slightly on the worn linoleum. It slowed, hesitated, then pointed straight at him. He chuckled. "Looks like it's my turn." He rose with ease, unfolding his body like he was built for motion. And then he danced. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't polished, but it was effortless. He glided back with a moonwalk so smooth it made Liam let out a stunned breath. His arms carved the air like wind. His steps were sharp, precise, then suddenly loose, like something untethered. He spun once, caught the edge of the light, and landed in a freeze that made the lantern flicker like applause. I clapped without thinking. Liam whooped. Casey grinned, brushing invisible dust from his shoulder, then sat back down, nodding like he'd just finished a ritual without a word. He spun the bottle again. It spun, and stopped at me again. I felt my heart flutter, a mix of nerves and anticipation. But this time, Casey didn't speak. He waited, letting me choose, letting me define this moment. My mind went back to a time when Richard used to pull me close in the kitchen, swaying to music that barely played before the distance grew. before silence became our native tongue. That memory passed like a ghost. I looked between Casey and Liam, and then I smiled. Truth, I said, voice playful. Liam scoffed. We weren't playing truth or dare. We are now. They both laughed. Casey nodded slowly. All right, truth it is. He leaned forward. What are you most afraid of? The room went quiet again. The wind howled outside, brushing the walls like breath. And I said, being invisible. The words left me softer than I expected. But once out, they couldn't be unsaid. No one laughed. No one spoke. They just looked at me, really looked. And in their silence, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Acknowledged, seen. The cold from the floor had long seeped into my bones. But I didn't move. I sat there, staring at the bottle that had pointed at me twice now, as if it knew something I didn't, or worse, something I'd forgotten. Casey's question lingered in the air like smoke. What are you most afraid of? And I'd answered without hesitation, being invisible. The silence that followed didn't crush me. It held me, wrapped around me, with quiet understanding. Liam shifted, his voice softer than I'd heard it all night. I think we all are afraid of that. I nodded, not looking at him. My eyes stayed on Casey. There was something in his expression I couldn't name, something that didn't look away. The moment stretched, and then I stood again. No one asked me to, no dare was given, but something in me had decided. I stepped forward, into the pale ring of light thrown by the lantern, the bottle, now a forgotten relic behind me. I looked at them not as boys, not as fantasies, but as mirrors. And then I moved this time. It wasn't about dares or tension or testing limits. This time, it was for me. I closed my eyes and let the storm guide me, not just the one outside, the one inside too, the swell of a lifetime of held breath, of whispered regrets, of silent bedrooms and untouched skin. My feet glided across the floor. My arms rose with the slow ache of memory. Every step peeled back something old, something heavy. The layers of being fine, of being strong, of being quiet. I danced like a confession, like I needed the movement to say what my lips couldn't, that I still longed, still burned, still mattered. The shadows on the walls followed me. The flicker of the lantern made my body waver, bend, stretch, shimmer. I twirled once, slow and low, letting my back curve, letting the ache of years echo through my spine. I opened my eyes. They were both watching, not like men watching a performance, but like something sacred was unfolding before them. My body found a rhythm, not from music, but from breath. I let myself feel the heat rise, the pulse in my throat, the power I had tucked away for decades under layers of motherhood, wifehood, womanhood. There were no catcalls, no jokes, no shame, only silence, and the weight of attention that wasn't demanding. It was reverent. I turned again, slowly, and stopped, chest heaving, hands still raised, face flushed with the heat of my own becoming. Neither of them moved. Liam's eyes were wide, not with lust, but with awe. Casey's smile was small, real. I let my arms fall gently to my sides. I was trembling, but not from fear, from exhilaration. I had not felt alive like this I couldn't remember when I exhaled. Well, I said, I guess I still got something. Casey stood, slow and deliberate, as if standing in the presence of something breakable. He stepped toward me, not close enough to touch, but close enough to warm the air between us. You do, he said, you really do. I smiled, but there was weight in it because under the fire, under the thrill, there was still the echo of Richard, his voice, cold, dismissive. You're not who you used to be. But maybe, I wasn't supposed to be. Maybe I wasn't meant to shrink just to keep him comfortable. Maybe the version of me he missed never existed at all. I felt tears pricking the corners of my eyes, not sadness, not guilt release. I turned toward the small restroom in the corner, my steps light, but certain. I'll be back, I said over my shoulder. Neither of them followed. But I could feel their eyes on me, not as a curiosity, not as a fantasy, as something real inside the restroom. I closed the door gently, leaned against the cool tile, and smiled at my reflection. The woman in the mirror was still flushed, still glowing, still here. I wiped a tear from my cheek, then leaned in. You're not invisible, I whispered. Not anymore. The mirror in the restroom was scratched and dim, the kind of glass that makes you look softer, or maybe just blurrier, like a memory not quite forgotten. I leaned in anyway. My reflection stared back, cheeks still flushed, eyes wide not with fear, but with something older, something deeper. I ran a hand through my hair. The strands were unruly, silver shining under the dim light. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't want to fix it. I just stood there, letting the silence soak into my bones, the tile underfoot cold and grounding. For years, I'd been walking through a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Polished wood, quiet halls, photos on the walls of who we used to be, smiles from a past version of us that had long since faded. Richard used to look at me like I was everything, until he didn't. Until the day his eyes started sliding past me like I was part of the wallpaper. Until his touches became functional, like brushing lint off a jacket. Until my voice became something he tolerated. I had told myself it was time, that it was normal, that every marriage grew quiet with age. But that wasn't quiet, that was erasure. And I'd let it happen. I stared at my face, fingers brushing my own cheek as if to confirm I still existed. I was here, I had danced, I had taken up space without apology. A soft laugh escaped me. It was ridiculous, wasn't it? A woman my age, flushed and breathless in a gas station restroom, because two strangers had looked at her like she mattered. And yet, I didn't feel ridiculous. I felt awake. I reached into my purse, pulled out a small compact, and touched up my lipstick, a deep berry tone I hadn't worn in years. I used to love this shade, used to feel bold in it. Richard once said it was too much. So I stopped looking at it now. I saw how it made my mouth look fuller, stronger. I smiled. My fingers trembled as I reapplied, not from nerves, but from the electricity still moving under my skin, like the storm outside had slipped into my veins. When I stepped out, the light from the lantern hit me full. I blinked, adjusting. They both turned toward me. Casey's expression didn't change, but something flickered there. Admiration, yes, but also a kind of quiet reverence. Liam let out a low whistle, not crass, more surprised than anything. "Damn," he said, shaking his head with a grin. "You're glowing." I laughed, the sound slipping out before I could temper it. "Maybe I am." I walked toward them, my steps steady. No shame, no hesitation. They made space for me without asking, without words, just a natural shifting, like the earth making room for roots to grow. Casey stood beside me, not close enough to touch, just close enough to feel. "We'll follow your lead," he said, voice low. I looked at both of them. Liam's smile was soft now. His eyes no longer darted around the room. They were fixed on me, present. My heart thudded. This wasn't about them. Not really. It was about me. It was about remembering I could still ignite something, that I didn't have to wait to be invited, that I didn't need permission to be radiant. My fingers brushed the counter, cold metal, solid reality. And still, there was something rising in me, slow, powerful, unapologetic. "It's okay," I said, my voice even sure. "Let's just see where this goes." They didn't rush. Neither did I. There was no hunger in the air, no tension built on obligation. Only curiosity, only warmth, and something softer still, a hush that felt like reverence. The storm outside had softened to a steady hush against the windows, like even the sky was listening. I let myself be seen, not as a mother, not as a wife, not as a ghost, but as a woman, whole, present, still burning after all these years. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't asking to be chosen. I was choosing myself. The room didn't feel the same anymore. Something had shifted, not loudly, not suddenly, but deeply, quietly, like heat rising from the floor, slowly warming the air until you realized you were no longer cold. I stood between them, not as a novelty, not as entertainment, but as presence. Casey was to my right, calm and steady. A quiet flame. Liam leaned slightly against the counter, arms crossed loosely, curious, slightly undone. No one spoke. And still, everything was being said. The lantern glowed with a steady hum, casting soft gold across our skin. Shadows danced at the edges of shelves and ceiling beams. Outside, the wind had softened to a hush, like the world itself had curled up to rest. I took a breath, slow and deep. There was no script, no map, only this moment ripe with possibilities. Liam's eyes met mine, flickering, unsure, but open. Casey didn't move, but the energy between us pulsed gently, like a tether stretched, but unbroken. I reached forward, not to touch, not even to close the space, just to exist in it. And something unseen responded, a current, a warmth. It traveled through the air, brushing against my skin like sunlight slipping through old windows, not burning, not pushing. Just being. I closed my eyes. Let the feeling rise, not in my chest, but deeper, lower. A hum that spreads slowly like ink in water, like fire waking beneath snow. The kind of energy that isn't about bodies or hunger, but about knowing and being known. I didn't need their hands to feel held, didn't need their lips to feel heard, because what passed between us wasn't spoken. It was the space itself, thick, charged, full of every word we didn't say. Liam stepped forward, just enough that I could feel the air shift again. His presence brushed mine, delicate, cautious, but deliberate. His breath caught, almost imperceptibly, as though he, too, was moving through something unfamiliar, something sacred. I turned slightly, my shoulder aligned with his, not touching, but aware, hyper-aware. Then Casey stepped closer. The warmth of his nearness bloomed along my back, subtle as dusk. I didn't turn to him. I didn't need to. We stood like that, three bodies orbiting one silent center. Time stretched, unraveled. Somewhere behind us, the bottle still lay on the floor, forgotten, irrelevant. The real game had begun long ago. A slow exhale left me, soft as silk. My spine loosened, my jaw unclenched. Liam's hand hovered near mine, not reaching, just present. The energy swelled again, this time different, more tender, more intimate than touch. It wasn't about being wanted. It was about being witnessed, chosen not for what I gave, but for who I was right here, right now. A pulse moved through me, a beat, a breath, a rhythm no one could hear, but we all felt. And in that unspoken space, something opened, a door long closed, and we stepped through it, not as strangers, not even as lovers, but as people letting themselves be real. Just for a moment, just long enough to remember what it feels like to be fully and quietly live. The silence in the room had changed, not empty, not hollow, but thick, weighted, like velvet draped over something wild. The storm outside had calmed, but something inside me still raged quietly, not in destruction, but in awakening. I stood between them, still wrapped in the warmth that hadn't come from touch. And yet, I felt touched. Every glance, every breath, every unspoken word left traces across my skin. Liam moved first, just a small step forward, barely more than a shift in gravity. But it was enough to feel the warmth of him trail along the edge of my arm. His gaze met mine not with boldness, but with an offering. His boyishness stripped away. What remained was sincerity, raw, unshaped, beautiful. Casey remained still behind me, but I could feel him. His presence was constant, grounding, a quiet flame burning close, not demanding, just there. His voice came low, not in my ear, but behind my shoulder, close enough to hear the care in it. You good? I didn't answer right away, because I was, but not in the usual sense, not in the way people mean when they say they're fine. I was good in a way I hadn't felt in years. Like a locked room inside me had just opened, and air had finally started to move again. I turned slightly, enough to catch both their faces, Liam's soft curiosity, Casey's quiet depth. The parts of me that had long been silent began to rise slow, uncoiling, not in shame, not in regret, but in bold, wordless declaration. I am still here. My voice came steady, more than good. And I meant it. Liam's lips parted slightly, not to speak, just to breathe, as if my answer had given him permission to feel something, too. Casey took a step closer. His nearness pressed gently along my back, like heat reaching through layers. I closed my eyes, and in that dark, I remembered Richard, not as the man he was when we met, but as the man he became, distant, blunt, dismissive. His words came back to me like static. You're too much. You're too old. I can't even look at you anymore. For a long time, I believed him. I folded myself smaller, quieter, tried to disappear in the corners of our house, hoping one day he'd notice I was gone. But he never did. And now here I was standing in the center of a stormlit room, with two men whose eyes didn't skim past me, who didn't ask me to shrink, who simply let me be. Maybe this was revenge. Maybe it was something softer, not a blade, but a balm, a reclaiming of power, of worth, of flame. I let the moment hold me, let the silence sing. Their nearness wasn't threatening. It was reverent, it said. You don't have to disappear anymore. You are seen, desired, known. I didn't need to be younger, didn't need to rewind anything. Because what stirred between us wasn't about age, it was about presence. My hand lifted slow, unsure at first, and brushed the space between us. Not contact, not collision, but permission. Casey's breath caught, Liam's gaze deepened. And for one long, suspended second, I let it all in, the heat, the stillness, the knowing. And just like that, guilt loosened its grip. Desire stopped asking for forgiveness. And I, a woman with lines on her face and fire in her chest, finally stepped into the center of her own story. By morning, the storm had passed. The snow still covered everything, blanketed thick across the world. But the sky had shifted. It no longer pressed down. It breathed inside the gas station. The silence had softened, no longer heavy with waiting, just calm, settled, like the quiet after something sacred. I sat near the counter, wrapped in my coat again, hands curled around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. It didn't matter that it was bitter. The warmth alone felt like a kindness. Liam sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping a pen between his fingers. He'd barely said a word since dawn broke, but he wasn't distant, just thoughtful. Casey stood by the window, arms folded, watching the soft glow of daylight stretch across the parking lot. His expression was unreadable, but his body was still rooted. None of us talked about the night. There was no need. The silence wasn't emptiness. It was memory. It held what we'd shared without trying to name it, without reducing it to labels or questions. I watched them move in small ways, Liam cracking his knuckles, Casey rubbing the back of his neck. I took in every detail like I was storing it for later, not to hold on, but to honor it. It wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't a mistake. It was a moment that chose us, and we said yes. I stood, stretching slowly, bones humming with fatigue, but not regret. Casey turned as if he felt the shift in the air. Our eyes met. We didn't smile. We didn't need to. He nodded once. A quiet goodbye. Liam looked up, his grin small but sincere. You heading out? I nodded. Roads should be clear enough now, I said. Liam stood, brushing off his jeans. Be careful. I will. I walked to the counter and set down the coffee cup. My hands lingered a second too long. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out a scrap of paper, and wrote something, folded it once, set it beside the empty bottle we'd spun the night before. Liam raised an eyebrow. What's that? I met his gaze, smiled. Just a thank you. Then I turned. Casey stepped aside as I passed, but I paused beside him. The air between us pulsed again, familiar now, gentle. Take care, I said. He nodded. You too. Outside, the cold hit me fresh, not sharp, just real. The snow crunched beneath my boots. My car was half buried, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a beginning. I brushed off the windshield slowly. The sky overhead was pale, the color of newness. When I climbed into the driver's seat and looked back at the station, I saw Liam standing at the window, holding the note. He read it, then smiled. Casey stood beside him, gaze on the horizon. The note was simple, just a line. Thank you for reminding me who I am. I turned the key. The engine hummed to life, and I pulled away, not fleeing, not escaping, just moving forward, carrying something I hadn't held in a long time myself. The roads were clearer than I expected. The plows had come through in the early hours, leaving long ribbons of gray through the white. My tires hummed along the asphalt. The heater hummed too, soft and steady. The house came into view slowly, familiar, too familiar. Everything looked the same, the hedges still trimmed, the porch lights still off, as if I had never left. But I had, and I wasn't coming back the same. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, watching the windows. No movement, no silhouette. I opened the door. The cold greeted me again, cleaner now, gentler. I let it wake me. Each step up the walkway felt strange, like walking into a memory instead of a home. I turned the key. The door opened without resistance. The house smelled like coffee and old pine, the scent of a life that had long settled into routine. Richard sat at the kitchen table, the newspaper open in front of him, the same robe, the same tired expression. His mug of coffee sat steaming, untouched. He looked up as I entered, not surprised, not angry, just there. I figured you'd be back before noon, he said, his voice flat. I took off my coat slowly, hung it on the same hook by the door. No apology passed between us. None was offered. None was expected. I needed air, I said. He grunted, a shrug disguised as sound. I stood there a moment, watching him, waiting for something, anything, a question, a glance that lingered. But he just returned to his paper, as if I had only stepped out for milk. Something inside me sighed, not in disappointment, not anymore, just in recognition. This was who he was now, and maybe always had been, and I had stopped being someone who needed him to change. I walked into the living room. The morning light filtered in through the windows, soft, pale. I reached for the old stereo tucked in the cabinet. It hadn't been used in years. Not since the days we used to dance barefoot in this very room. I turned the knob. The speakers crackled to life, hesitant, then warm. A slow jazz record I didn't remember leaving in the tray began to play. The notes drifted, tender and low. I stood there, alone in the space we once shared. And I danced not for him, not for Liam, not for Casey, but for the woman who had remembered herself, somewhere between a bottle on a linoleum floor and a quiet snowfall in Vermont. I let the music move me gently, no flourish, no show, just presence. The floor creaked under my steps. My breath moved with the rhythm. My eyes stayed closed. This wasn't about reclaiming the past. It was about honoring the now, the woman I had become. When the song ended, I opened my eyes. The room looked the same. But I didn't. 1 week later, the snow had mostly melted. The icicles along the porch had thinned to delicate spears, dripping in the morning light. The roads were dry. The sky was wide and blue. I stood by the mailbox in my robe, fingers cold against the metal latch. There were bills, a grocery flyer, and a single postcard wedged between. I turned it over slowly. A sketch covered one side, soft graphite lines, capturing a moment that made my breath catch me in motion. A woman dancing, lantern light caught in the curves of her hair, one hand reaching into nothing and everything. The strokes weren't perfect. They were alive. On the back, just 2 words written in blocky, uneven print, still glowing. No name, no address. But I knew. I brought it inside, sat at the kitchen table where Richard usually read his paper. He wasn't home this morning, off at some appointment he hadn't told me about. I stared at the postcard for a long while, not because I needed to decode it, but because it was simple and true. I carried it to the mirror in the hallway, held it up beside my face. I didn't look younger, but I didn't look invisible. The lines around my mouth hadn't vanished. The silver in my hair still caught the light. But something behind my eyes had changed. Something had returned. I traced the edge of the card with my thumb, then tucked it into the mirror's frame, just above the corner. A reminder, not of them, of me. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for Richard. Not for a new chapter. Not for permission. I was already living it. I stepped back, looked at my reflection. The woman looking back didn't flinch, didn't shrink, didn't apologize. Let the world age me, let it try. I would not be erased, not now, not ever.